Hey, David. First of all, hello. We have the two Daves on again, and that'll confuse everybody. But how are you doing, David?
Never had it so good. How are you, Dave?
I'm doing fine. This is TCA Crossroads, and we are happy to represent TCA Fund as well as to present great guests sometimes. And occasionally, like today, we're going to have a deep conversation about something that everybody, entrepreneurs and investors, should know a lot about. Did I get your attention?
Got my attention. I'm really interested in this subject because it creates a lot of angst for startups as well as companies that have been in business for a long time. So, super subject.
So the whole subject we are talking about, now that we gave you that roll up to what we haven't told you what it is yet, is how about independent contractors? What's legal and what's not? And for young companies that always want to treat people as independent contractors because they don't want to pay the taxes, where do you draw that line? And here it is. So let's add it to the stage and let me show you if I can, David, and then we're going to talk about it. The challenge is getting more difficult. That is determining people as independent contractors and not employees, because the IRS has added even more tests to the many tests they had before. So let me name what some of those tests are. You as an investor or entrepreneur need to know this. If you are an entrepreneur, it is vital because you can be sued by the IRS for not only the money that you paid as an independent contractor, but for the two forms of tax, the employer tax and the employee tax, and a 25% penalty and accumulated interest. If this has gone on for 3 or 4 years and you thought you could get away with it and you didn't, and the IRS catches you with an audit, don't. What more can I say? I don't know if you've had this experience, David, but that's why we're going to have this slide and the next one, helping people to understand.
I have not had that personal experience, but I've been in companies both hiring employees as well as being an employee who was as being a contractor who was hired as a 1099. And these rules are really critical because not only do you have the IRS going after you, you have the Franchise Tax Board in California, and the combination can be basically getting hit high and hit low as the analog goes in football.
And so the second slide I'll show you is California's assembly bill that makes this even more difficult. So here we are. You see the 10 on the slide. So let's cover them fast. Number one, if you have an independent contractor or are, you must have a signed contract for service, not an oral agreement, but a contract that determines what you are providing, when you're going to report, how much you're going to be paid, and the fact that you are independent. And then those things in the contract have to include either these things or they have to be things you can prove to the IRS. Number one, you cannot be directed by the company's management or CEO. This is an independent contractor. You are going to be the one who makes a decision about what you do, the quality of your work. Yes, you can be fired. If you ask for a secondary employee of yours to be able to do the job, the company can fire the company, which is you, as a contractor, but you're the one to direct who's going to do the job. Is that a surprise?
Yeah, let me ask you a question then. Is it better if I'm developing a contract to do it under, for example, I have a consulting operation called C-Level Partners. Am I better off doing it as David Friedman, independent person, or am I better off doing it as C-Level Partners?
Each one works because you are a business. And that is going to be one of the things that we talk about. You need to be a business. You aren't working just for the one firm. If you can't prove that you're working or available to work for other firms, you fail the test. And the IRS will say this should have been regular old payroll and there should have been payroll taxes. So you just said that right. Now you have a business, and so your business therefore does do other things, and you pass that test. If you put it into your personal name, now you have to prove that you as an individual also make money from other things like it. And if you do, then you pass that test as well. So be careful. All right, integration. How integrated are you with the business? For instance, are you being directed? I just said you can't be. Are you directing somebody else within the business as if you're a manager? Ouch, you fail the test. You cannot do that as an independent contractor. So you can't sit in a seat and say to the person next to you, I want you to do this. That violates the rule of the independent contractor. Ouch. All right. So
Well, I gotta ask a question on that one. What if I have a desk in the company for whom I'm working?
as long as it's not your desk, you have to have a desk of your own. And that's one of those, I think it's, tools and materials. Well, so you asked it early. If you use your own tools and materials, then you pass the test. And if you have your own desk, even if it's at home in the bedroom, and you have, your own machine, computer, you pass the test. But if you're sitting at that desk you just described, and you don't have a desk at home where you really do the business that you are the contractor for, you do not pass the test, and you are an employee. Ouch again. How about the term? If you say, I'm going to be working for you, and in the contract, there's no end of the term, you fail the test. You are an employee, even if you have that contract, even if you have your own equipment, you fail the test with the IRS. How about reporting? If you are reporting to the CEO, this is number 6, and the CEO says you must do this, even though the contract specifies what you're going to do, you fail the test because he's directing you as if you're an employee. Ouch again.
But you can, but hold on. But you can, as a contractor, say to the CEO who's signing that contract, let's get an understanding of what my deliverables are. And there could be reporting, like a status report. He can redirect. He said, well, we want to really go in that. That's not prohibited under these rules, right?
Not at all. And in fact, one of the rules is you have to report. As part of your contract, you can't just say, I'm going to do this without having finished the contract by saying what you did. Otherwise, the IRS will say you're just an employee. If you're getting used to my saying that, it's true. All right. So tools and materials I just covered. You got to use your own. Now, what happens if you're sitting at that desk next to the person next to you temporarily? You happen to be there, and they may have a computer sitting on the desk. That's okay. As long as you have your own computer and your own desk and you use it ordinarily. And remember, you've got to have more than one customer for your independent contractor business, or you fail both cases. Okay. And the physical facility I just covered again. That is the one where if you have your own physical facility, even if you're working at the physical facility of your customer, you're okay. But if you don't, no. Number 9, works for more than one company. So I'm repeating myself, I guess. If you don't work for more than one company, you fail the test. And finally, the contract has to have a termination clause. And it's either one based on term, number 5, or on the ability of one of the two to say within X notice, usually it's 30 days, we will stop this contract. So one of the two can always pull the plug by saying termination. So I have a second slide, and then we're going to stop all this and talk about what the effect is on small businesses. It's a big one. So California has this new test. It's the ABC test, and it's for gig employees. So David, before we started the show, you kind of said that. What about the gig employees? Yeah. And here it is, because California was the first state to do this. A, companies must prove that they don't control the work performed. So they can give a notice to gig employees, for instance, for the driving service, that there are these customers waiting. The gig employee picks up the job. But if the company says you must perform that job and pick up that particular person, that fails the test because the company directed you on what to do. So watch it on that one. B, the contractor cannot work for the core concept of the business. The core concept would be, in the case of Airbnb, it would be the software, the reservation system, all the things that make Airbnb work, right? So the contractor can perform maintenance work for a property or many properties, housekeeping work, lots of things for Airbnb, but can't work on the software, which is the core of Airbnb. And number C, the contractor must establish an independent business. And here we are again. It's just a repeat of the federal law again. So if you have one of these gig drivers and the gig driver hasn't established either a C Corp or an LLC, or even just files Form C on the federal income tax return, that's not an independent business. And that contractor, therefore, can't claim that he or she is a contractor. Now, the last thing to say before we open this up is some ways you can get around this for some companies. But watch out. I just gave you the rules. Small companies want to cut cash drains, but watch out. I just told you what the penalties are. And how about founders? Can founders be independent contractors in their own business? No, they cannot, because they fail the law. They fail the rules that we set in the first 10. So be careful. You can't pay yourself as an independent contractor if you're the founder of a business. And then the tax bill, I said at the very beginning, and I'll repeat it right now, it can reach back many years. It can ruin a business. And so the final thing for me to say before I open it up for you, David, is the management has to have discipline and understand the liability for doing this wrong. Wow. Did I do that right?
I think so. I have a whole bunch of questions, and we can
Good.
maybe do a quick, sort of like a speed Q&A.
Yeah.
Okay. Do I have to have a minimum term or a maximum term? For example, what if I have a contract that's for 2 years, or do I have to have one less than a year? What is there?
No, there is no rule about that. It can be as long as it has a term.
Just a term. Interesting. Is there a statute of limitations on how far back the IRS or the Federal Franchise Tax Board can go to penalize a company? What if something happened 8 years ago?
Yeah, this is a guess. There are 2 terms for the IRS, 3 years for personal tax returns and 7 years for business tax returns. And so there is this question about which side of it are you on? If you're the business, you get a liability that can go back for 7 years. If you're an individual who claims to be the contractor, you can go back for 3 years. But the IRS sometimes can penetrate these rules if intent can be proven that you intended to deceive the IRS.
So if I'm an employee, if I'm a contractor and I'm working for a company, the IRS can penalize me, the contractor, versus the company?
How about that? Both.
Boy, that's really vicious, frankly.
But the company still has to pay this extra money, not you as the individual.
Okay, I was just curious about that. That would make more sense.
Mm-hmm.
But let me go back to talking about software development, because we see a lot in software development. I pick up a I want the 2 cases, software development and then medical device. So in software development, I want to hire somebody that's really expert in a certain area within the development. So there's my general software. I'm developing a cyber security software, but I'm looking for a specific person that will help me design and develop the interface. Mm-hmm. Kosher or not kosher?
Kosher as long as you write a contract with that person. If you just say, I need you for 3 hours, and the guy comes on for 3 hours, he better have a whole lot of other customers, even though there's not a contract, because you've got to pass most of those tests. The IRS likes to say 5 of the 10. So they're not going to hit you with all 10 of the items I had on page 1.
So if, let's say I'm doing a good job with this company, I have a contract and it's basically using up all my time, I'm still looking for other business to work for, but I don't have any. I just have one customer right now. Problem or not a problem? Not
a problem as long as you can prove that you were out there looking. And the way you prove that is you have offered yourself on one of the hosted platforms. That's a good one.
Got it.
You have worked in the past for somebody else. That's a good one, as an independent contractor. Or you have something in the way of a contract not yet filled. In other words, you have a contract outstanding that hasn't been signed yet for another company to also work.
Let me give you a couple of other scenarios and see how these play out. What if I'm an advisor to a startup or on the board of directors or board of advisors? Clear-cut case of just being a consultant, right?
Completely different. Sure. If you are, let's say you're on the board of advisors, and you know my rules about that. If you spend more than a telephone call or two a month, and you spend more than a 4-hour planning meeting a year, you can probably charge them for consulting fees. And are those consulting fees going to be independent contractor, or will they have to take payroll? They are independent contractor because you're probably doing this with a lot of different companies. And you have a agreement. If you're an advisor and you don't have an agreement, shame on you. You have an advisory agreement which serves as an independent consulting agreement.
All right. Does it make a difference if I take options or warrants? Well, I guess I can't take, or just if I take warrants, can't get options. Then I'm definitely an employee if I have something under an option. But if I take equity or if I take warrants, does it make a difference versus cash comp?
Boy, am I glad you asked that. First of all, if you take an option, it'll be an NSO, a non-statutory option, which is taxable when you exercise it as opposed to when you sell the stock.
Right.
So that's not an advantage, that's a disadvantage. And it's taxable at ordinary income rates,
right?
Which there's some protection against that for employees who exercise. So the answer is you will have an option, but once you do have an option, there is no payment of any tax until you exercise it. So that usually we exercise when the company is sold.
So let me flip it around just a little. I'm now the head of the Friedman conglomerate, Friedman Trucking. Well, not true. I wish I were, but just say it's Friedman Enterprises.
Yep.
And I want to hire this gentleman named Dave Berkus. And, I know you're really smart and you can help me with a couple of things in terms of help, in designing my product, my logistics, whatever. And instead of giving you cash, I'm giving you 100,000 shares of stock that are currently worth $3. What happens in that case?
Completely taxable, and I'm glad you asked that question.
I knew that answer, by the way.
Yeah, because a lot of people say, I'll work for you as your CTO, and I'll do that in quotes because you're not really a CTO, but I'll work for you that way, and I'll give you 10 hours a week. And for that, I want 10% of the company. That's not atypical for a startup. The problem is, if the startup was founded for, say, $1,000, $10,000 in value when it first began, the founder should have put in their portion of the $10,000. Like a 60% founder gets $6,000. He should have written a check and copied the check and put it into a folder, because that's how you prove what your basis is.
Yep.
Well, now you give another 10% of that $1,000 to this independent contractor you described. If he doesn't write a check for $1,000, he is now taxed. He should be taxed for that amount of money.
Yeah. So you want to be able to write the check, send a copy literally to the IRS and to the secretary of that company to make sure you have clarity and a history of payment for that. Because the other positive news, which is great for a consultant that does this real early on, is the 1202 rule. Right?
Yeah. So before I talk about 1202, which you can talk about, it's our favorite rule, is let's go back a second. You don't have to send that check to anybody. And I have...
No, that's correct. You don't have to send the check to anybody.
I have 3 stories of having written $30 checks at the founding of a company that was founded for a couple $100. And one of those turned into be very big, $500,000. Another turned out to be 3,000%. Which was $360,000. So I've had a couple of great wins from writing very small checks, sitting at the table with the founders at the founding, where I did the work for them at the same time as the advising, and asked them, would they mind if I wrote a small check that equaled my little piece? And in each case, they said yes. Okay, now let's get down to rule 1202. You explain it, because both of us can.
Yeah, so it's real simple. If I were to be a consultant and I'm getting shares of equity and it's real early on and it's pre-revenue, it's maybe the MVP has been developed, the valuation of that company is very low. If I'm getting X percent of the company, I can literally write that check and say, I am an owner of this much equity because I have that opportunity to pay. It's a first equity from the company and it's direct equity. So what happens is if in 5 years and 1 day, that $100 that I paid in, to your point, or whatever the number is, for 1,000 shares may now be worth $100 a share, and I now make $100,000 in 5 years and 1 day. From a federal point of view, I pay no income tax, and depending on the state, you either pay no state tax, although some states do charge you the normal income tax. So that's fundamentally what the rule is.
That's correct. California is the very bad state and charges.
I didn't want to say that because I live in California, but yeah, it's not a good state. Atlanta, Georgia is zero. I mean, right. Just an FYI for you.
I have lots of stories. I love to tell stories. So there's one. I sat at the table at the Sheridan Universal and helped this group form a company. I love the concept. And so I got an option for, I think it was 3%. And I think about 5 years later, when I began to see this company opening offices in New York and Chicago and Los Angeles, I knew something was going good. So I exercised my option, which is rare. I just said you usually don't do that until you sell, to start the 5-year clock. So I paid $7,000. I exercised my option. And this year, which is another 8 years later, I made $500,000 on that, all tax-free.
Yeah, well, except for the California rule, right?
Except for California.
Yeah, except for California. So you pay 13.3% or something on that.
Don't give me the number. I'm going to cry in front of everybody else, and that's not fair.
Yeah, so, it's funny because I told my wife about this, and she said, her comment was real simple. She said, from your lips to God's ears, may you make that money, and then we can figure out where we live.
Well, that's very good.
You have to do it before you have the exit,
And sometimes these exits take 18 years. So don't think that you're going to get it in 3.
Yeah, I get it. All right. Well, this has been really interesting because I know we have a lot of gig workers out there in dealing, as you know, in the startup space. People use consultants for specialty software development, user interface. In the medical field, you may require FDA consultants to try to help wend their way through the FDA process. You may have consultants on, the product development portfolio or the strategy. So it's not uncommon. And these are very critical things, not only for those entrepreneurs that are starting companies, but the knowledge of what it is, the different compensation, and the things that a consultant should be aware of is really critical. Having been one, still are one, still am one, I guess is the better English. So I think this has been really superb that you're able to share that information with our listeners and viewers.
And with that, we're going to end this edition of TCA Crossroads and hope that you keep a copy so that you can remind yourself forever not to cross that line. David, have a good time.
Same to you, Dave.
See ya.